Hey everyone, welcome back. And if you're new here, I'm a Doge that reads tabletop RPG horror stories, and I hope you consider subscribing and liking the video. And if you really like it, consider sharing it with your friends. In today's episode of Dungeons & Dragons Horror Stories, we have a tale that is so bad that we need to have some kitties to get our wholesome levels up, in preparation for the psychic damage we are all about to be exposed to. There we go. Now that we're properly prepared, let's get right into this doozy of a story. So, I made a post talking about consent in r/DnD. Here's the full story of that horrid campaign, by Reddit user Sigdom. So first, let me preface this with a disclaimer. English is my third language, so I may screw some things up. I'll do my best to keep this easy to understand. Also, edited to add a TLDR for ease of reading. So, I made this post, which has ended up with some horror story worthy content by itself. People seriously get worked up for talking about consent. The campaign I want to talk about happened years ago, 2019 specifically. I've been thinking about sharing that whole ordeal for quite a long time now, but since someone asked about it after someone cross-posted the deal, I'll be finally telling the thing. Let me sum up this group for ease. They will be identified with the subsequent names. The DM will be referred to as the DM. Youngest in the group, about 1 year younger than me. The main problem person, surprisingly not the DM, will be named Minotaur. For context, this person is a borderline sociopathic person who had groomed the DM into a relationship ever since he was 14 and Minotaur was 21. Oh boy, I can already tell that this story is going to be painful. We were all adults when the campaign happened though. The player who had their consent stepped on will be called Dwarf, after their character. They were the one who ended up pairing with me in this whole ordeal. We didn't know much about each other before the game started, but had been acquaintances for years. They're a centaur, a bit older than Minotaur. I found out about this much later, but he had been in a trio with the DM and Minotaur, despite knowing that the DM had been groomed. There is human, largely irrelevant for most of this. And then there is Loxodon. Loxodon was invited with no prior warning to the campaign, 5 sessions in. I did not know him at all, but he proclaimed, proudly, to be a Nazi. What? Why didn't you run far away at this point? I still don't know how the DM and Minotaur invited him there, considering most of the group was queer in some way. The group, excluding Loxodon, had known each other for years. Some of them were childhood friends, some were friends of friends, but we had been in RP forums and close spaces for a while. Most of them lived in the same city, though Loxodon and me were the external ones. Although, I think Human was studying abroad at the time. We had lost contact for a year, maybe. And then I hit them up with, hey, could we maybe play some D&D? It could be fun. A few months later, the DM offered to, well, DM. And so, the campaign started. There was a session 0 where some things were discussed. I don't recall everything, but one of the hard don'ts came from Dwarf, who asked specifically for no explicit child harm, especially on camera. Children die, of course, but there's a difference between it being a background thing and describing the whole deal in detail. There were more things, but I don't recall them all. I mentioned that I wanted to keep away from furry content on my end, i.e., don't turn my character into a furry, because the DM, Minotaur, Human, and Centaur did make rather questionable furry stuff. The DM accepted, and so, the campaign began. The first sessions went smoothly. Minimal combat, minimal issue, apart from the DM favoring Minotaur at all moments. This was a given. Their relationship had always been really unhealthy. We just didn't know that he was groomed from so early on, and the DM would very much do anything Minotaur asked of. The hard nose took a few sessions to become relevant. It started with a situation in which 2 donkeys were gifted to the party, but they were untamed, so Minotaur took the decision to tame them up. Animal handling, you'd guess. Speak with animals? Anything. So, nope. He transformed into a donkey and had a 30+ minute scene of sexual bullshit with the donkeys. All the while, we did voice that it was uncomfortable and that we'd rather move on. The DM favored Minotaur as expected, and things went on for a while. A bit after, there was a scene where we found some children in an underground basement, possibly slaves, beaten up and described in great detail. I honestly don't recall much of what the kids were giving to the plot, and it was just a bit uncomfortable, but we moved on. The first big yikes happened a bit after. I would have thought that the Nazi and donkey things would have been pretty big yikes. The party ended up fighting a group of bandits, I think. Notably, there was one child amongst the bandits, trained to be a bandit. Just this sort of, the poor kid had nothing in his life, so he joined questionable people. The fight went on, with Dwarf making great strides to avoid the child from being harmed. Their character was very much a dad in heart, and this was normal behavior for Dwarf. The battle was pretty much over. The kid was safe, and then the DMPC decided to kill the child. I don't know if it was burning hands or hellish rebuke, but he described in great deal how the fire consumed the kid, paired with very detailed descriptions on the matter, even with constant reminders of, hey, you agreed not to do this on session 0. With the kid killed, combat finished. We had some arguing in character. DMPC somehow still went with the party, despite being an utter murder hobo, and we ended the session. Things started to get worse after session 5. Up until then, combat had been scarce, and session 5 marked the first big dungeon, in which the first combat ended up with 2 PCs killed after an incredibly unbalanced combat. Centaur and DMPC died, and they got their replacement PCs shortly after. The combat was horribly imbalanced, with a gazer, a helmed horror, 2 or 3 spellcasters, 2 ettercaps, and a displacer beast thrown against a level 4 party. The only reason we didn't TPK is because my character managed to crit the gazer, since he was literally the only character that could reach it, because the whole terrain was made in the enemy's favor. So, things went on. We had our in-game drama, and I had never played D&D before, so I assumed that this was normal, and we went on. The dungeon was horrible, and the second big red flag came shortly after. Session 7 or 8, the dungeon lasted 5 sessions. I told the DM a few days ahead that I would be unable to attend the latest hour, because there was a family dinner and I had no way to cancel, and he said okay. For 3 hours, while I was in, the session was perfectly peaceful, but combat started just after I had to take my leave. The party was ambushed by furries, just a bunch of were-creatures, all of them resistant or immune to non-magical damage, and no one but my character, due to artificer stuff, and Minotaur had magical weapons. The second I leave, I get a DM from Dwarf, saying, hey, so the DM immediately made your character unconscious, and he's targeting him with advantage due to the unconsciousness with the enemies. The main objective of that fight was to try to turn my character into a were-creature. Dwarf was a battlemaster and had the shieldmaster feat, so he put all of his resources into trying to protect my unconscious character while I wasn't in the game. DM spent the entire combat trying to bypass that. By some sheer, insane luck, my character managed to not catch the were-furry thing, but the DM was left incredibly frustrated by that. I suspect this had been Minotaur's idea, since he always tried to force furry content onto me. Next session, I'm just not feeling it, and Loxodon gets invited out of the blue. He is an asshole. Loud, awful, and a rules lawyer, except he had no idea about the rules. He joins Minotaur into interrupting everyone with fake made-up rules. The DM introduces some cards that made the combats more exciting, suggested by Loxodon, which made crit fails have big consequences. And I mean, your character swings the sword and cuts his head off, dying instantly, kind of consequences. Some of us say that that's a bit extreme, then there is much arguing done. The DM says that he will reward players that use the cards. This comes up paired with the fact that he'd been giving all of the loot to Minotaur, money, magic items, and so on. Even before introducing the cards, literally, the Minotaur ate a mimic as a giant frog once, and somehow that gave him a permanent 1d6 extra acid damage whenever you swallow enemies with transformations that let you do so. Oh, the Minotaur also misunderstood rules, and was always dashing and attacking as part of the same action, for some reason. At this point, there is much talk between Dwarf and me. Centaur seems to be pretty uncomfortable. Privately, he tells us that Minotaur had been abusive to him, and that he started yelling at him in his own home, and that he actually had considered leaving, but didn't. It was during one of the latest sessions, where Loxodon decided to start calling my characters slurs, not in-game, but as a player. He was a drow. Imagine the rest. There was a hefty amount of transphobia in it too, despite my character not having any indication of being trans. But everyone knows elves are all traps. This brings us to the latest session, the dungeon's final combat. A 4-hour combat against an impossible group of enemies, including a Gorgon that was ready to petrify the whole party with no way to avoid it, which managed to petrify the Minotaur, who spent the entire combat bossing people and harassing everyone because he was bored. A dragon, a Kotal, and a bunch of humanoids, a displacer beast, an elf mage, a helmeted horror, and an Aarakocra with multi-attack, and something else that I'm forgetting. Some of which attacked from our back after we specifically checked the previous rooms for secret entrances, traps, and so on, and all critted while doing so. The enemies attacking from the back were designed specifically to target my character alone, who was ranged. Combat went on, and as expected, everyone got downed. Loxodon got killed, and Dwarf was close to it. The last character still up was my Artificer, who, being terrified of being held captive for story reasons, it happened before and almost got him killed, decided to try to run away from the whole ordeal to seek help, used his last spell slot to cast invisibility, and ran away back to the entrance. The DM told me that I wasn't allowed. He decided that the entrance was suddenly collapsed, and there's 4 were-furries patrolling it, so I was forced to just surrender. DM got really angry about it after the session. I hadn't mentioned this before, but experience wasn't shared equally. He rewarded roleplay instead, which meant that the Minotaur was 2 levels ahead of the party, and got the biggest XP in the session, despite having been a statue the whole time. The DM told me that he would have my experience, because your character is chaotic good, but he abandoned the party, which is an asshole move and isn't logical with your character. Let's remember, my character was trying to seek help, and had a particular thing with having been caught by the enemies of the past, and hence was terrified of it happening again. Dwarf and me are pretty close to leaving. That's when the DM hits us up and decides everyone will get a different permanent curse for no reason at all. Minotaur was of course excluded. He hit me up to tell me what I was getting, and this was when the DM finally had his "I'm the DM and you can't tell no to me" tantrum. The DM: so the effect is Crystallis paranoia. When you get in high stress situations, like a combat or hard situations, and up until the stress goes down, you have to roll a DC 15 wisdom save. A save my character was weak in. If you pass, nothing happens. If you fail it, you have disadvantage because the woman, his patron, is fucking with you. And probably, as a funny prank, you're going to be a were-rat because you didn't get captured immediately. Wear stuff was my hard no from session 0, because the group had furries who, have a habit of sexualizing them to no end. There was a zoophilia scene even. Me. What? Nope. I'm sorry, but no. That's too much. The crystal thing is pretty insane by itself, because a 15 wisdom save DC, or getting disadvantaged is really hard to deal with. It meant that, literally, 75% of my turns, I'd have disadvantage. But I'm willing to accept it for plot reasons. But I'm cutting the line at lycanthropy. I'm sorry, but I won't deal with that. The DM. Wait, what do you mean no? Like, I am the master. The thing went on. I was sent a video about how DMs have the ultimate say in anything. He got extremely mad because I accused him of being a bad DM. Now that I have more experience as a player, I know that putting a curse on a character that means almost permanent disadvantage on everything in an already deadly campaign is just a way to want to kill said character. But at the time, I was even willing to deal with that. I just refused to give in to the one thing that I wasn't up for, engaging in furry content with a group who had the druid turn into a donkey to fuck other donkeys. This is when I left the campaign. Dwarf did the same, after saying life was busy and they just didn't have the time. This was a group of friends, after all, so we sought to not stir more things up. Centaur was almost close to leaving, after having talked at length about feeling bullied by Minotaur. Human also had told us at some point that he felt pretty bad about how controlling Minotaur was. I decided I'd be DMing my own campaign afterwards. I invited Dwarf in, invited Centaur in, and I tried to invite Human. Human got his phone read by Minotaur, who had full control over both the DM's and Human's social media, and could take their phones whenever to check their DMs and private shit. Minotaur and the DM got so incredibly worked up about it. Human ended up siding with them because, well, they're my childhood friends. We ended up cutting contact, and I haven't ever regretted it since. This was a mouthful, so let me leave with a last happy note. Dwarf and me went on to have better sessions, with a better group. Centaur player ended up going his own way. I found out only later about him having done a trio with the DM and Minotaur, with all of the grooming implications it had. We've since found a group of way saner people, and we currently have multiple active campaigns, with the longest one on 80 plus sessions. We understand consent and everyone's limits, and put great work and joy in the whole thing. I couldn't love them more, honestly. We even do a lot, and I mean a lot, of art for the whole thing, since most of us are artists. I wish I had known that bad D&D is worse than no D&D, but for other people, I want to recommend not staying in toxic groups. There are better people, and once you find the people you're comfortable with, this hobby is so incredibly rewarding. TLDR. Played with a group of friends after losing contact for a while, which had some unhealthy dynamics going on. Asked for 2 hard no's, no harm to children, and no forcing furry shit to others. Campaign progressively got worse, boundary-wise, and specifically, the 2 hard no's were forced onto the players that did not want that shit. Also, at some point, there was a zoophilia scene regarding donkeys. Well, OP definitely made the right call on leaving that table. Not only did the DM show blatant favoritism towards Minotaur, but also completely ignored what the other players weren't comfortable with. Then the whole donkey thing, which I would have noped the hell out of there right then. It's good to hear that OP is now enjoying D&D with a group of players that doesn't try to force OP to become part of some strange furry fanfic. I mean, holy shit. I know some furries that are normal, well-adjusted people, but it seems like that fandom attracts some nasty individuals. Anyway, after that, I think we need a kitty palate cleanser. And by the looks of it, we have time for one more short story. So let's hop right into it. My DM decided to help our PC team as a DMPC by Reddit user Edge Rajin. My DM decided to help our team by joining it. Our DM created a character at the beginning of the game, which is fully understandable. The character was a story progressor, essentially. I have no problem with this. A character used to progress a story is fine. My problem is this. He made it so his character has infinite XP. That's not a joke. That's what his character sheet says. Can use any spell at will, and only has to touch something to kill it, as he has unlimited death touch. He also has roughly 20 large slimes. Every combat that we've had, he decides that he wants to demonstrate his power to us, and does something new just to kill whatever enemy we're fighting. A giant king that is basically a Dark Souls type character that he can kill in one turn. Oh man, that's fun for the players. I honestly didn't expect it to work, is his excuse every time. I want to drop out of this campaign, but I don't want to upset my friend. What do I do? I'm not having fun just sitting there trying to do a fight where I get one turn before whatever we're fighting dies because he can do 50 d10 damage from a single spell. Then his slimes come right after him, doing basically the same thing. I don't know how, but they do. Damn, that does sound like it sucks the fun out of the entire thing. What is the point in playing when anything that you do has no impact on the world, and fights are just swept over by a character with God mode activated? My advice to OP would be to first talk to your friend, and tell him that the DMPC is way too overpowered and just makes the game not fun to play. If he listens and removes the DMPC, or even just nerfs him, then hopefully the game can become fun. If he doesn't listen, I would just leave. You don't have to put yourself in a situation that you hate just to placate to someone else's feelings. If he is a true friend, he will understand. Though, what advice would you give? I'm curious. Do you have a story that you would like to be shared on the channel? If so, feel free to post a link in the comments to the D&D Doge subreddit, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and really hope that none of you ever run into someone like the one from that story. Until next time.